Charles Simmons, a successful businessman, boarded a flight expecting a peaceful journey. However, what began as a routine trip quickly turned into a shocking encounter that left everyone speechless. Watch as the truth unfolds, and let us know where you're watching from today. We love hearing from you. The airport buzzed with life, travelers rushing past, announcements echoing through the terminals, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixing with the sterile chill of the air conditioning. Charles Simmons adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag, his eyes scanning the bustling terminal as he approached the check-in counter. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, he blended into the crowd, just another face in a sea of passengers. And that was exactly what he wanted. The check-in agent barely glanced at him as she processed his ticket. "You're in economy," she said flatly, tapping at the screen with disinterest. Charles offered a polite nod, suppressing a smile. If only she knew. As he made his way through security, he couldn't help but notice the subtle differences in how he was treated compared to others around him. The businessman in the tailored suit ahead of him was greeted warmly, while Charles received a quick, indifferent glance. Years of experience had trained him to expect this, but it never got easier. Boarding was no different. The flight attendant stationed at the entrance scanned his ticket, her smile faltering slightly when she saw his name. "Are you sure this is the right seat, sir?" she asked, her eyes flickering toward the first-class section just beyond. Charles kept his voice steady. "Pretty sure," he said, stepping past her without waiting for further comment. As he settled into his seat in economy, he overheard whispers behind him, two flight attendants chatting in hushed tones. "Did you see that guy in 14A? Looks out of place, doesn't he?" Charles exhaled slowly, gripping the armrest. This was exactly why he was here. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through emails, but his mind was already racing. The test had begun, and soon enough, the real challenges would present themselves. Charles leaned back in his seat, letting the low hum of the engines fill his ears. He could feel the tension creeping in, the quiet but unmistakable weight of scrutiny. From the corner of his eye, he caught the flight attendant, Lisa, according to her name tag, whispering to her colleague, Sarah, a blonde woman with an air of practiced politeness. "He's probably in the wrong seat," Lisa muttered, not bothering to lower her voice enough. Sarah chuckled softly. "Or it's one of those upgrade scams. They always try it, you know." Charles tightened his grip on his phone, scrolling mindlessly through his emails to mask the frustration brewing inside. He'd been here before, too many times. But today, it felt personal. The words, the assumptions, the casual disregard, they were all too familiar, yet they still stung. Moments later, Lisa approached with an artificial smile plastered across her face. "Sir, can I see your ticket again, just to confirm?" Charles handed it over without a word, watching as her eyes darted from the boarding pass to his face, scanning him with barely concealed suspicion. She hummed, her lips pursed. "I'll need to check something with the front desk. I'll be right back." As she turned away, Charles heard a passenger across the aisle mutter, "Why are they treating him like that?" A middle-aged woman dressed in a business suit gave him an apologetic glance. He offered a slight nod in return, acknowledging the silent support. A few minutes later, Lisa returned with Sarah in tow. "Sir," she began, fighting to maintain a patient tone, "your ID looks a little different from your profile in our system. Are you sure it hasn't been recently updated?" Charles exhaled slowly, his voice calm but firm. "It's my ID, and I fly this airline quite often. I assure you, there's no mistake." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unease settling among the surrounding passengers. Charles could see the battle playing out in their eyes, the struggle between protocol and prejudice. He leaned back and smiled faintly. Perhaps you should double-check again. I have all day. Lisa's face tightened, but she turned on her heel without another word, and Charles watched her disappear into the galley. He could feel the eyes of those around him, some curious, others uncomfortable. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. This was only the beginning. Charles sat in his seat, his patience thinning with every passing second. He could hear Lisa and Sarah whispering a few rows behind him, their voices low but laced with skepticism. He had expected resistance, but the persistence of their doubt was beginning to grate on him. The flight had just reached cruising altitude when Lisa returned, standing beside him with her arms crossed, her expression taut. "Sir, our system still isn't recognizing your details properly. You wouldn't mind stepping to the front for a moment, would you?" Charles looked up at her, calm but unwavering. "I do mind," he said, his voice steady. "I paid for this seat, and I intend to stay here unless, of course, there's a valid reason I should move." Lisa hesitated, clearly not expecting pushback. "It's just protocol," she muttered, glancing around nervously as nearby passengers watched the exchange with interest. The businessman across the aisle, the same one who had noticed earlier, leaned in slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but pointed. "This gentleman has provided his ticket and ID multiple times. Is there an issue here?" Lisa's face flushed. "No, sir, it's just a routine check," she replied quickly before turning back to Charles. "Sir, I'll have to escalate this if you refuse." Charles took a slow breath, keeping his cool. "Do what you need to do," he said, leaning back in his seat. "I'll be right here." Minutes later, Sarah returned with the lead flight attendant, an older man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Simmons," he said, reading from his tablet. "It seems there's been some confusion regarding your booking. We need to verify." "Let me stop you right there," Charles interjected. His voice was low but commanding, drawing the attention of everyone around. "I've presented my ID, my ticket, and I've been nothing but cooperative. The issue here isn't my seat, it's your assumptions." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Lisa shifted uneasily, while Sarah looked down at the floor, clearly regretting the path this had taken. A passenger a few rows up discreetly took out their phone to record the exchange. Charles noticed but remained focused on the lead attendant, who sighed and nodded. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Simmons. Our apologies for the inconvenience." Lisa opened her mouth to protest, but a stern look from the lead attendant shut her down. Charles exhaled and turned his gaze back to the window, but he could feel the energy shift around him. The whispers of the cabin grew louder, and he could see the uneasy glances exchanged between the crew. He glanced at his phone, where notifications were already lighting up. A quick search on social media showed that a clip of the earlier exchange had been posted and was quickly gaining traction. Comments flooded in, "Why does this always happen? You'd think they'd know better by now. Handled like a pro. Respect." Charles put his phone away, focusing instead on what lay ahead. He wasn't done yet. Charles sat still, the hum of the engines filling the tense silence around him. Lisa stood frozen in the aisle, her face a mix of frustration and unease. The lead flight attendant had walked away, but the damage was done. Passengers were now openly staring, whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval. From his seat, Charles could see Sarah retreating to the galley, clearly avoiding eye contact. He watched as Lisa hesitated, then approached him again. Her voice was lower but still sharp. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. You have to understand that." Charles met her gaze calmly. Doing your job shouldn't involve singling people out based on assumptions. Lisa blinked, taken aback, before clearing her throat. I just thought. Before she could finish, a deep voice interrupted from behind. "Excuse me," said the businessman in the navy suit. "I've been watching this unfold, and I have to say it's unacceptable. This man has shown his ID multiple times. This is not about protocol anymore." A few passengers murmured in agreement, some nodding while others looked away awkwardly. Charles sighed, his patience hanging by a thread. "Look, Lisa," he said, keeping his tone composed. "I travel a lot. I know how this works, and I know when something isn't right. Let me make this easy for you. If there's a real issue, call the captain. Otherwise, let's put this to rest." Lisa opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. The weight of the situation was sinking in now, and the growing attention from the passengers only made it worse. She looked to Sarah, who stood silently near the galley, avoiding her gaze. Just then, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for any inconvenience and assure you that all passengers on board are verified and welcome to their assigned seats." Charles smirked subtly as Lisa's shoulders sank in defeat. She forced a tight-lipped smile and muttered, "Enjoy your flight, sir," before walking away stiffly. A round of relieved chuckles rippled through the cabin. The businessman across the aisle leaned in once more. "Handled it like a pro," he whispered with a grin. Charles nodded, but deep down, he knew moments like these were far from over. This was just another day in his life, a battle fought with patience and dignity. He adjusted his watch and stared out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly beyond. At least this time, justice had been swift. The cabin settled back into its usual rhythm, but the air still carried the weight of what had happened. Passengers stole glances at Charles, some offering small nods of support, while others quickly averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the confrontation they had just witnessed. Charles leaned back in his seat, inhaling deeply, willing himself to enjoy the rest of the flight. He had dealt with situations like this before, but each time left a mark, an unwelcome reminder of the biases he couldn't escape, no matter his achievements. A soft voice broke his thoughts. "Mr. Simmons?" He looked up to see Sarah standing beside him, her posture less rigid than before. There was no clipboard, no forced smile, just genuine unease in her eyes. I wanted to apologize for earlier. That wasn't fair to you." Charles studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "I appreciate you saying that." She offered a nervous smile and quickly turned back to the galley, but Charles could tell the lesson had sunk in. Whether it would stick was another story. Moments later, his phone buzzed. A notification from a popular news app flashed across the screen: "Flight attendant fired after incident with business executive goes viral." Charles sighed, rubbing his temple. He didn't intend for this to turn into a spectacle, but he knew it would. The internet never let things go unnoticed anymore. From the corner of his eye, the businessman in the navy suit leaned over once more. "Looks like this is going to be a headline." Charles chuckled lightly. "Seems like it." As the plane began its descent, Charles looked out the window, watching the city lights grow closer. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane, it was about the everyday battles fought in silence, the ones that didn't always have an audience or a happy ending. But today, at least, justice had been swift, and that was a step in the right direction. Have you ever experienced something like this, moments where you were judged unfairly, only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Let's stand together against discrimination and continue the conversation. And don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening stories like this one. Your voice matters.